Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm finally ready to bring you a long overdue Goosebumps graphics review. And we're going to be looking at book number 1, Creepy Creatures. I know that I've already read and reviewed all 3 of the books in question that were put into this graphics adaptation, and for some reason I've been putting off this review for so long, and I apologize to all of you out there. And the only reason why I'm getting into it today is because I'm trying to clean up loose ends of stuff that I just haven't gotten around to, and clean up, my video reviews a little bit and get back on track. And this was on the top of my to-do list, and I was like, you know what? I'm finally going to get to it. So I sat down and reread it, I think now for the third time, for you all for this review. And I have to say, Goosebumps graphics off the bat, without getting into my thoughts immediately about this specific one here, is a series that I really do admire. Or I should perhaps say, I really do admire its former iteration. Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, Goosebumps graphics' first original run was, I think, in the mid 2000s, and it ran 3 initial volumes. And then once I think Goosebumps the movie came out, they re-released a fourth graphic novel adaptation with 3 of the former stories within the first 3 volumes in colored versions, as opposed to their black and white counterparts that were in the originals, as this book, for example, right? Along with a brand new story adapting Night of the Living Dummy in color as well. Nowadays, Goosebumps graphics has come back, but they have changed the formatting of it, and some people seem to like the new format, and it seems to be led by literally one adapter right now, who is Maddie Gonzalez, and she's already put out The Haunted Mask, and she's about to put out Monster Blood, and perhaps more classic Goosebumps tales that we all know and love in the near future. But this was the last of the original run of the Goosebumps graphics that I had to get to and review. And I have to say, for this being the first one, I'm honestly shocked about how much I enjoyed this graphics compared to the other 3 that I've read before this. And I will say, out of the original 4, the original 3, and then plus the Slappy Tales of Horror or Terror, whatever it was called, this is probably my second favorite behind Terror Trips. And that's shocking. And I might have some hot takes with this particular graphics in question, so prepare for that when we get to the review portion. But yeah, Creepy Creatures. Yeah, if you don't have this in your collection, this adapts Werewolf of Fever Swamp, The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, and The Abominable Snowman in Pasadena. The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, of course, is done by Gabriel Hernandez. The Scarecrow Walks Midnight was adapted by Greg Ruth, and The Abominable Snowman in Pasadena was adapted by Scott Morse. This is probably going to be worth your time, especially if you're someone like me who grew up as a Goosebumps fan and a comic book fan, and you just like comic book horror. You need to go look at this. I think this is going to itch a scratch for a lot of you out there. And if you ask me, I feel like Goosebumps should bring this format back, just with new stories in mind. Like, if you're gonna bring like a spin-off Goosebumps comic to what Maddie Gonzalez is doing with the graphics now, why not swing for the fences and have 3 brand new stories for a little spin-off anthology release a year to go along with what she's doing? I think that would be fantastic, and this is a great proof of concept. Um, and it's a shame that we're not getting that. But anyways, let's talk about Creepy Creatures here. So, the stories, as laid out on the cover, is the actual order that you're going to see the stories in the book. I've actually already read The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, its colored version at least, when I did my review, I think 3 years ago now, on the Slappy Tales of Terror or Horror, whatever it's called. And I remember thinking that the colored version looked kind of weird, and I wasn't the biggest fan of Gabriel Hernandez's art style. And plus, I think somebody pointed out in the comment section there was an error in one of the panels, and I never noticed it until I went back to look at it, and I was like, sure enough, yeah, there is an error compared to this black and white version. And I have to say, I think I prefer the black and white version over the color that we got there here. As for the story, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp is a slow burn book, and if I'm being honest, I think that this graphic novel adaptation here condenses the source material very well, and it gets to the key points of the book. It covers basically everything you need to know. Grady Tucker, he's the main character. He moves to Fever Swamp with his family. His parents are researching um, deer and their migratory habits. So they've moved to this swamp in Florida to see if they relocate these deer, which come from foreign ecosystems, can adapt in a very different environment. And he lives out in the middle of nowhere with his older sister. um, there's like basically no neighbors around. And all he has in his backyard is this massive swamp to go venture into. And very early on, he thinks he hears noises out in the swamp, and he goes to investigate the nearby area, and of course finds this swamp hermit. And the swamp hermit has some local legend behind him, where he perhaps is associated with the supposed werewolf in this town's mythology. And this, of course, is being propagated by this neighbor Will that he meets, who pretty much becomes an integral player later on in the story. And we find out throughout the story some twists and turns involving, Grady coming into contact with this dog and perhaps taking it in as a pet. But the dog is a suspect. It could possibly be the werewolf doing all these attacks onto animals. And of course, his parents' deer that they brought to Florida with them and what have you. And we get all the answers by the end of who or what is the werewolf, and what have you there. It's pretty much what you would expect. And it's pretty faithful. It keeps the book's ending, and it does it well. But if I had any gripes with it, aside from me really liking the condensing of the source material here compared to the book, I think what holds it back is the art style. Even in black and white, I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Gabriel Hernandez's art. And I think that's just a pure subjective thing. It looks a bit too weird for my liking. In here, I'll show you what I mean by that in an example real quick. Um, like, you'll have some really solid panels here, and then you'll have some really weird looking ones. Hold up. There is one that makes me laugh when I look at it. Here's a good one. All right. So you'll see like good character expressions, some good line work, and then in the very next panel, you get these screwed up looking shots of his like sister that just does not look good. And then like the way he draws terrain is very odd. It's almost too, I don't know the description I should use here. It's almost too wispy, I should say, where he's trying to draw like hair on the wolf and make everything look kind of realistic in the moment. It kind of looks like a static image almost, or like an impression in his mind of what he thinks it would look like. I mean, here's another example of it looking goofy. Like, why does Grady look like this? It's just, why? I mean, it's just goofy for the sake of it. But aside from that, I think this is a very solid adaptation nonetheless. Nothing too bad to complain about. I'd probably give this black and white version probably the same score as the colored version. And since I only give zero point 0.5 increments, this story in particular will get a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And spoiler alert, this is easily my favorite story of the bunch. And that's probably my biggest hot take with this, because the second story here, The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, seems to be the big fan favorite of this book. Now, I should say this up front. In terms of page count, I went ahead and counted the pages of these stories. I think Fever Swamp's adaptation was 41 pages. Scarecrow Walks at Midnight was 39. And I think Pasadena's here was 43. So Scarecrow Walks at Midnight has the shortest adaptation. And in my honest opinion, I think it needed about an extra page or two to flesh out some context that's completely missing in the story, in terms of its adaptation here. But I will say, in terms of art style, this easily wins out as the best art style. It looks the scariest, looks the most menacing, and when I think about what should be in a Goosebumps graphics in terms of art, this is a kind of style you should go for. And I'll show you a quick example before I tell you about the adaptation itself here. Contrasting that to Fever Swamp, what I just showed you. I mean, look at the art here. There's a really creepy scene here. I'm gonna go to the iconic grandparent scene in the dream sequence. Kind of show you what I'm talking about. It just looks incredible. Um, Here, right here, with the grandmother looking like a scarecrow face. I mean, the art here just looks fantastic in black and white. And honestly, I can understand why they didn't choose this one to be put into the Slappy re-release book because of, I guess, how much it probably would have cost them to put color into this one. But it looks fantastic as is in black and white. You didn't need to do any of that. So the art is definitely worth the price of admission. However, when it comes to the story, it's basically the same thing as the book version counterpart. The main character Jody and her brother, I think his name is Mark. They're picked up by Stanley, who's their grandparents' farmhand. And Stanley is a very eccentric and weird guy. He might not be all there upstairs, if you know what I mean. And he might be a little superstitious or perhaps overly superstitious. And he has this superstition book, and he tells the kids in this car ride that he's made these scarecrow come to life on the farm. And the kids are like, okay, you're just saying some random gibberish. But when they get to the farm, they realize that their grandparents have kind of changed since the last time they saw them. And throughout the story, Jody and Mark witness the behavior of them acting afraid of the farmhand Stanley. And Stanley is revealed to have a son named Styx who likes to play pranks on the kids and perhaps is leaning into this gibberish that the kids think that Stanley's saying about him making the scarecrows come to life. Well, Styx also realizes with the kids that his father isn't who he normally is and that his dad is going to make some really bad decisions if they mess with him too much. And throughout the story, we see Jody kind of fall into that paranoia because of what she's heard from Stanley and because of how her grandparents are acting, that perhaps her mind's playing tricks on her and maybe these scarecrows are actually walking during the daytime. Like there's a scene where she goes to go fishing with her brother and thinks a scarecrow is coming to life. And she mentions that phenomenon, right? And then there's another scene where, you have um, her being locked inside of a farm outside of Stanley's little house where he lives with his son Styx, and he thinks that she sees a scarecrow outside of the window and stuff like that. And then there's a dream sequence, like the dream sequence I just showed you, where she's seeing her grandparents turning into scarecrows. And all this builds to a climax and comes to a fold when um, the kids feel like they need to step into the situation after there's an event with Stanley, and of course Stanley accidentally, or I guess on purpose, reads aloud a spell. Now here's the thing: the comic adaptation doesn't really display this context too well, because you never actually see the spell being read for some reason, but you still get the iconic climax where the kids in question perhaps maybe have to handle some scarecrows that come to life, perhaps. And you see what happens with that. And then it keeps the book's twist ending. So, yeah, in terms of like adaptations, this was pretty faithful. But like I said, there's some context missing. This is one of those adaptations I feel like is just missing something. Like Horrorland was missing the humor in that adaptation. I think that was in Terror Trips. I really liked it. It had some weird art though. I forgot who drew that one. I think her name was Jill Thompson or something. Yeah, was not a fan of the art all that much at times. Um, but it was missing the humor there. You know, Deep Trouble, I think, had a weird comic kid manga style to it, which was also in Terror Trips, but it was missing the monologue of Billy Deep, right? This, I think, is just missing context. Because Scarecrow Walks at Midnight is one of those slow burn stories like Werewolf of Fever Swamp. You can easily condense the story down for a comic and be just fine. But like I said, it just needed about a page or two more of context. And I don't know if maybe because of the art style is the reason why it ended up being the shortest adaptation here. But nonetheless, um, I, I will say I was a bit disappointed with this. I was hoping that this one would be my ultimate favorite version of Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, but it actually ended up being my least favorite version of Scarecrow Walks at Midnight that exists. I'd probably give this like a 4 out of 5 stars, though. It's still a very good adaptation, just not as strong as I wanted it to be. Which leads me to The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. And I've heard many, many, many people say that this is one of their least favorite graphics adaptations of all time because of the art. And I'm going to say this up front about Scott Morse. I'm not a fan of the art style whatsoever. And I think a lot of it has to deal with the fact that The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena primarily is set in Alaska with a lot of snow. This is a black and white book. Let me tell you, it is very hard to make out what you are looking at half the time reading this story in terms of the art. And it's also very unappealing on the eyes. I feel like this story needs some color to it to make it pop, but I'm going to say, I guess, another hot take here. I think in terms of like writing and story and possible changes made here from the source material, this one honestly feels the most worthwhile of the three. And if there was any of the three I wanted to see get colorized the most and put into that Slappy Tales of Horror book, it was The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. Go figure, right? Go figure. And I'll show you a quick example of what the art looks like so you know what you're getting into when you get this. And I'm going to show you what the average panel will look like. I'm not going to, give you the best looking one here. But, oh, nope. That's what we're dealing with. It's not the greatest art ever, and it's really hard to look at. I mean, look. If the context wasn't here on the word bubble, here, I'm going to show you a panel of you're supposed to be in an ice cave. If you didn't know that you were in an ice cave in a word bubble, would you know that this panel right here is inside of a cave? No, you wouldn't. But I will say that it has some fun looking shots here and there. It's not all a wash in terms of the art. So yeah. So this one honestly, kind of like I would say the closest this one felt to was the horror Camp Jelly Jam in terms of trying to shake up the source material. But this is like I think the only time in the history of Goosebumps graphics where I guess the adapter decided to take a lot of liberty. And you're going to notice this with two specific things with this story: the characters, their names and ethnicities, I guess, and then of course the very ending and even omitting characters out of it, which I was kind of pleasantly shocked by. But we'll get into that now, I guess. So I believe the main characters in the original Abominable Snowman of Pasadena book were named Jordan and Nicole, but in the graphics version, they are renamed to Luis and Anna, and there's really no discernible difference to their personalities to the book counterparts. So I'm kind of wondering why that was done that way, but nonetheless, it's basically the same story, right? You have in this version Luis and Anna who live in Pasadena, California, and it's the wintertime, but they don't really feel winter in Pasadena, California. It's nice and sunny all the time. So they want to feel snow in the winter for the first time in their lives. And after talking with their dad, who recently got back from an expedition, who needed, I guess, professional photography that he's a specialist in, and got to experience snow, the kids are jealous and they want to go with him on his next trip in the winter to some snowy tundra to get away. And even their good friend who lives in the neighborhood would also like to tag along if she could, but she doesn't end up doing so, and she comes back in the fold later on in the story. But lo and behold, their father gets a call to go up to Alaska to do a nature expedition shoot to, I guess, look for the myth of the abominable snowman that possibly lives up in Alaska. So the kids are excited and hype, and they head up to Alaska with their dad. And there they meet this eccentric man. I think his name is Arthur Maxwell. I could be mistaken on the name, but he's an old, I guess, travel guide for the area, and he has like four sled dog huskies, and he's going to be navigating them up to this cabin out in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of all the snow, so they can get nearby the area where locals claim where the abominable snowman lives. And they spend the night there, and then of course there's a fake out prank involving some Yeti footprints, let's just say, that the dad seems to paint all the blame onto Luis for. So we have some reasonable disbelief that the father might not believe what these kids are saying for the remainder of the story, right? But the kids, after being sent to go venture out into a part of the woods and then having to turn back because the sled dogs got spooked, and after seeing that their guide has up and left with the dogs, I guess for his own safety with all the food, the kids have to figure out a way to tell this to their dad and get back to the cabin. But they end up finding, or I guess stumbling into, this cave system and finding the abominable snowman. And from this point on, they possibly reconnect with their dad, possibly show him the evidence that the abominable snowman is real. And it gets to a point where they made the discovery of a lifetime, and they bring the Yeti back with them to Pasadena, where we end the story off of, I guess, in a secondary arc with the kids, where they're talking with their best friend who lives in their neighborhood, and she wants to go see the Yeti. And of course, there might be some magic involved and some unexplained stuff that's prevalent in the book, but there is some neat change ups that happen at the end that the book obviously ended on that I wasn't a fan of, that the graphic novel, in my opinion, fixed and corrected. And a lot of that has to deal with these two bully characters. I think they're twins that are really annoying in the book. So take that for what you will. But nonetheless, yeah, The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. This was a refreshing adaptation for this series, in my opinion. There is some, episode-like qualities from the '90s where they took some liberties here and tried to make it its own thing, and I really appreciated that. And I like the fact that Scott Morse here switched up the twist and made it better, in my opinion, by getting rid of the twins. You would think that that's not a good direction, but it ended up being a good direction. And yeah, the only thing I just don't understand is why he changed the name to Luis and Anna. Beats me, but I don't know. I mean, minus the art style being really unappealing to the eyes, I think a colorized version would have made this story pop at the very least. And like I said, if I had my say of which one of the three I would have put in that slappy re-release adaptation in color, it would have been this story out of them. Shockingly enough, I'd probably give this a 4 out of 5 stars as well, but for different reasons. I think where it excels is that this easily feels the most full and expansive out of the stories. It has the most dialogue. It's honestly the most fun to read. And if I had to pick out of the three stories on paper, which one I think would fare better in a comic over being in a book, I think Abominable Snowman fits better being in a comic than a book inherently, at least compared to the other two. Fever Swamp and Scarecrow, these are slow build stories. These are made for books. This is an adventure story. Abominable Snowman of Pasadena is a shoe-in for a comic. And honestly, I would even go as far to say that this should have been a comic over a book to begin with. So take that for what you will. So with that being said, going over superlatives real quick. If I had to pick my easy favorite, it's going to be The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. My least favorite, I mean, this is hard, would probably be Pasadena because of the art being so bad. But I will say, in terms of the story, which one I think had the best story for this comic here, I'm going to give it to Pasadena and give the worst to Scarecrow, honestly. But in terms of art, I'm going to give the best art to Scarecrow and the worst art to Pasadena. So honestly, there's some superlatives that all three earn, but I think Fever Swamp is just the most solid of the bunch. And obviously, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, so it gets the highest distinction. Um, and like I said, my least favorite is Pasadena, so Scarecrow is obviously my second. But I was honestly shocked with this one, y'all. I think this was probably my second favorite of the Graphix, like I said, from the original four. Um, I can't remember what I gave. What is it? Scary Summer. I think I gave that like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and the same thing applies with the Slappy installment. And I think I gave Terror Trips 4.5 out of 5 stars. I don't think this is quite high like that, but this is definitely more solid than the other two mentioned. So I'd probably give this Graphix installment here a 4 out of 5 stars. This is a very good one. There's nothing much else to say. I kind of wish that we got more of these, like maybe like 2 extra volumes to chew on before we had to go into a Slappy reprint, and we could have had even more stories to add to this collection. Now that we've switched from this format to one singular story a book, some people might be all for that, and I think some books do deserve that, like The Haunted Mask, for example. But I think that we should go back to this in some fashion, whether we're getting new stories out of it, brand new. I'm not talking about adaptations, or adaptations. I would love to see it. But yeah, that's all I have to say about creepy creatures here. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this Goosebumps Graphix book before. What's your favorite story? What's your least favorite? Did you love this installment? Did you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.